Okay, we are live, and this is the first of many conversations I will be having with other writers and artists on Substack who are 50 or older, as I am. And my first guest is Nancy Norbeck. And Nancy and I know each other from several different venues. I think we originally connected on Amber Petty's Pitching Hour and got to know each other. I was a guest on Nancy's wonderful podcast, Follow Your Curiosity. And I'll let Nancy share a little bit more about herself and her work.
Yeah, so I've been doing Follow Your Curiosity for about not quite 6.5 years now. And I also am an author. I have a novel called The Silver Child, and I'm a creativity coach. And I've got a course called Make Bad Art, where I help people to let go of their perfectionism, which frees them up to do all sorts of creative things and also be nicer to themselves and improve their relationships as a result. And working on all sorts of other fun creative things too. And I publish on Substack a publication called The Spark, where I talk about creativity and also frankly whatever else I feel called to write in any given moment, so it can be a little bit of anything. So that's me in a nutshell.
I can relate to that. For those of you who don't already know me, I am Wendi Gordon. My Substack is Changing Lives, and I've been writing it weekly for 3 years. I say writing it because that's what I did originally, but starting this year, I have switched to video and audio posts primarily, with a written one every now and then. But of course, with the written and audio post, you can always click view transcript if you prefer to read content. But it's been a wonderful adventure. I started out writing strictly about mental health and have since shifted to incorporate spiritual health because, of course, the two are deeply intertwined. And I have talked with so many other wonderful writers, including Nancy, who understand that creativity and spirituality kind of go together. And we're interested in exploring spirituality in the broader sense, apart from all the religious baggage, just, our daily lives and creativity. And so this series is specifically about how our beliefs and lives have changed since we turned 50, however long ago that may have been. Some of my guests are like in their 80s, and it's amazing the work that they're doing. But anyway, so Nancy, you want to share one big belief that has changed for you?
I think I think rather than sharing it as a belief, I'm going to just start with the story that I told you, which is when I was about 23, not quite 24, my mom turned 50. And when I called her to wish her a happy birthday, I said, "Happy birthday, I'm jealous." And my mother said, "Thank you. Are you crazy? Have you lost your mind?" No, because I figure by the time you turn 50, one of happened. Either you've figured it all out, or you don't care anymore if you figured it all out. And I think my mother had absolutely no idea what to do with this, kind of probably said, okay." And so, little more than 3 years ago, when I turned 50, I called her up and, she said, "Happy birthday." And I said, "Thank you." And I said, "Do you remember what I said to you when you turned 50?" And she said, "No." So I told her that, what I just told you. And I said, "You know what? Turns out I was right. I haven't figured it all out, and I don't really care anymore if I figure it out." And I think that I don't think that, like, a switch flipped that morning when I woke up or anything, but I think that, there is just this gradual feeling of, yeah, that stuff that I used to care about really isn't that important anymore. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I do care about a lot. I care about my nephews and what their future looks like. There are certain issues that I care about a lot, but a lot of the stuff, like the minutia, the stuff especially where it has to do with what other people think about me, I do not care anymore for the most part, unless it's like some very particular thing. I really don't care anymore what people, like, okay, if you want to think that I'm crazy or that I'm a terrible person or whatever, and as long as you don't have some impression that's going to like land me in prison that's completely incorrect, I really don't care. You can think whatever you want to think, and that's fine. It's really, that expression that what other people think about me is none of my business. Like,
Yes.
I've never totally been able to wrap my head around it as that expression, but that's kind of as close to it as I get. It's kind of like, yeah, okay, whatever. I,
Yes, that
I
has been a similar um, big thing for me, and almost all of the other writers that I've connected with so far to schedule future conversations. That when we were younger, for some, it was being caught up in appearance, physical appearance, the clothes, the makeup, whatever. That was never really as much of a thing for me. But my thing was very much all about, I have to achieve and I have to have others' approval and all that external validation to feel good about myself. And my shift was rather dramatic in being forced out of my former career as a pastor, well, out of one position. And then as I subsequently interviewed, realizing I can't pretend to believe this stuff and be okay with all the hate and violence that's being justified under being Christian. So that, I had to totally shift careers. And there was a lot of, both spiritual and mental health crisis with that. But coming out of that on the, to where I am now, the gift of that was, okay, number one, I have nothing left to lose, and number two, I'm free to say whatever the hell I want to, and it doesn't matter who I piss off. I'm not going to lose my job over it because I'm self-employed. It's wonderful, very liberating to get to that point. And even with my own family, um, of course, it affects me more when my mom or somebody close to me disapproves. But I'm also very aware of how conditioned we all are by society to have that whole achievement model. And, the path we're all supposed to follow is go to college, get a good job, get promoted, get raises, et cetera, and then one day retire and actually be happy and do what you want to do. And I just reached a point where I was like, no, I'm not willing to be miserable for most of my life in the hope that I'll live long enough to one day be happy.
Yes. Yes. And that is something I saw through at a very young age because that is how my parents lived their lives. And and in we I grew up in South Central Pennsylvania in a very Pennsylvania Dutch family, and for people who are not familiar with that area, I want to be very clear, we were not Amish. People think Pennsylvania Dutch and Amish are the same thing. They are not. Um, but I come from, a long line of Pennsylvania German stock. And so those folks know how to pinch a penny like nobody else. And to the point where I still feel guilty when I spend money, even if I have it. But what I was raised with was the idea that, you save up all of your money now, and then when you retire, you get to live this great life. And I remember, thinking when I was about 13, looking at all of this and thinking, so what you're telling me is that I have to be miserable now in the hope of this existence that we assume is coming in 60, 50, 60 years. But you're missing that part where you could be hit by a bus anytime and then. And don't you think that's kind of dumb? Like, okay, I get that you should have some money when you get there. But don't you also think that you should enjoy what you've got while you have it because you know you have it now? And the sad thing is that now my parents, who are not quite but very nearly 80, my dad has some mobility issues now. So that whole plan didn't exactly work out the way it was supposed to. And about eight 8 years ago, I went halfway around the world to Australia and New Zealand, and I had an excuse that a friend of mine was getting married in Australia. She was also getting married here. Kind of left that part out. Um, but I fully expected to hear from my parents when I said I'm going to New Zealand and Australia for a month that, you should save your money and you should do that later when you retire. And yet I didn't. And I think it was because it was a year or two after my dad got his diagnosis.
Mm.
And so it was like, yeah, you know what? I'm not doing that. I'm going now while I know I can.
Yeah, for my husband and I, even though I was still seeking others' approval to a large extent, the life changing event for us was we vacationed on Maui for our 10th anniversary in 2001, and like it was instantly home when we walked on the island, and the spiritual energy and the natural beauty, and especially the underwater world. Snorkeling was like, oh my God, I'm in heaven. And so we literally, on the plane ride home, we're already talking about how can we move to Maui. We had bought a book called So You Want to Live in Hawaii with all the practical stuff. And like within a month, we had our house put up for sale and impatiently waited for it to sell. And then the next year, we both quit our jobs, which were our new professional careers as pastors, which we had were tens of thousands of dollars in student loan debt from getting the master's degrees for. But nevertheless, we went to Maui. We had tried to get jobs and stuff lined up in advance, but that wasn't possible. We knew our career wasn't possible because there was only one church of our denomination on the island. But we were just like, screw it. You only live once. This is what we want to do. And on top of that, another older pastor, the day after he retired, he went hunting and there was a hunting accident and he was killed. And so that was another reminder that, yeah, that all sounds great that one day we're going to have this life, but you never know what can happen. We may not get to that life. I'd rather live now. And so we've spent 10 wonderful years living on Maui, worked in the tourism industry. So we got to do all the cool activities for free, the luau's, the boat trips, the helicopter rides. It was glorious. Ultimately, it was not financially sustainable. And now we live in Texas, but I will never regret that we did that. It was wonderful. Um, and yeah, that was hard to explain. Some family members were like, what, you're throwing away your career at 5 years into it when you still have all this debt from your degree. But like I said, no regrets.
Yeah, you have to listen to yourself. You just do. If you don't, you're going to end up regretting things later on that you didn't do because somebody else told you not to.
Hmm.
And it's so hard to actually remind yourself that it's okay to listen to yourself when all of these other people are saying, "What are you doing? You're throwing things away." But at some point, you are really the only one you have.
Yep.
You only have the one life, and you've got to do what you feel in your gut you have to do. Because it's at a certain point, if you haven't done that, something in you is going to force you to do it in a way
Yeah.
that you like or a way that you don't like. And so you might as well go with it, do it the way that you like. It's so much better. But it can be really hard to hear that even when you realize logically this is so much better. It's hard to hear that when you've got other people trying to tell you who you are, to trying to tell you what you can and can't do. It's tough. But I think the gift of turning 50 is the ability to just start saying, I don't care what you think.
Yeah.
I don't care. And it's harder when it's family and people who are closer to you. It's easier when it's like, the culture thinks I should do this. I don't care. You know?
Yeah. It's funny to me, like some people are so hurt, get triggered, like on social media or even Substack, wherever, if a reader leaves an angry comment or insults them, attacks them somehow. And that's one way I'm very fortunate that I truly don't give a shit at this point. Why should I care what some random stranger thinks? That I'm too liberal, too woke, whatever it might be. Why does that matter?
I will tell you when I published my book, which was almost 10 years ago. It was June of 2015. I was so excited. It was my MFA thesis novel. It was finally out there after several years of, editing it and putting it away and pulling it out to edit it again and all of that. And I sent it out to some book bloggers and folks like that to get reviews because I had published it myself. And what nobody had warned me about was your first bad review.
Mm,
And and I was sitting at my desk at work when I got it, which is the worst place to be because you don't want to read it, but you want to read it because you're so excited because you don't know that there is a time bomb sitting in that you just got, right? And and I sat there at my desk and I still remember exactly how it felt. It felt like this rush of heat that came straight up my body, and I especially remember it like coming up into my ears and all the way up into my head, and because it was bad. It was bad. It kept getting worse. It was awful, and I sat there at that desk and wanted to die. And of course, I was supposed to be working, so I
right.
couldn't tell anybody about it. And I was just like, excuse me, I have to go to the ladies' room for the next 48 hours. And, like, I need to not be here in any way possible. And I texted a couple of friends, and one of them, God bless her, knew exactly what to do, and she sent me a couple of links to collections of famous classic books and their terrible reviews. And it saved me. It absolutely saved me. So, reading how The Handmaid's Tale was completely panned by the New York Times was just like, not that I am Margaret Atwood, not that I will ever be Margaret Atwood, but it just felt like, oh, Margaret, you and me together. you know? It was just like, wow, if they said that about her, I am in the best possible company and it's all going to be okay. And so I think realizing that like it happens to everybody, and so like it's still not a fun experience. It's not something you want to go through, even if it is a comment on your Substack and not a review of the thing that you spent years and years working on. But it's still like when you realize everybody gets crappy comments, everybody gets bad reviews, it at least makes it more normal and more human and easier to just be like, yeah, okay, you're one
Yeah.
person and I don't have to pay any attention to what you think now.
One of the first articles I wrote, I started writing on Medium for a couple years before I started my Substack. And on Medium, I wrote about like all kinds of different topics. But one thing I wrote about was exactly that. I did a whole article about famous writers who had totally gotten panned. And like Dr. Seuss almost burned his original manuscript because it had been turned down so many times and he decided it was crap. And I mean, on and on and on with, like you said, multiple famous authors and how many times they got rejected. Um, and that did inspire me, absolutely. Yeah. And also the same thing with imposter syndrome, to hear best-selling authors say, no, actually, I have it worse now because I feel this, like I wrote this bestseller. And so everyone expects me to, be this great writer. And what if my next book flops? So yeah, it's something that never goes away. And even though, I say, oh, I don't care what people think, there's always still going to be a part of me that does. Like when I create this awesome product, especially when I just like offer it as a free download and like no one gets it. Now, granted, that's partly on me because like I mention it once and then they don't get it. And I'm like, oh, obviously no one wants it. but but yeah, and the same thing with the comparing on Substack. When there's a post about, I can't believe it, I started a month ago and I already have 750 subscribers or whatever. And I'm like, I've been writing 3 years for a week, for every week, and I only have like 500 now. Finally, it's so easy to do that comparison in anything, and wonder like, what am I doing wrong? But at the same time, I'm able to keep going because there's that wiser self that knows, no, we're each on our own journey. We each have different values, different tribes, different goals, and there's no one right way for everyone. And, if I just do me, my people will find me, and, and I'll be led to people that can mentor me, and all the rest.
Yeah, and I think that's the distinction, right? Like there are the things that we care about a lot, right? And that thing that we worked on really hard that we wanted to share with the world and we really hope that people will buy and that will make a difference in their lives, that we care about a lot. And so if it doesn't go anywhere and people aren't receptive to it and whatever, that's a different story. Then it's like, okay, what happened? What did I misgauge about this? Is it the actual thing? Is it how I talked about it? Is it something else?
Mhm.
And then you have to be really, really careful that you're not taking it as something personal about you, because it's probably
Right.
not about you. It's something about how it's packaged or, how you talked about it or something like that. It's the other stuff, it's the more general stuff that's
Mhm.
really just blow off. But since we're talking about, the product versus you, when I was in grad school for my MFA, there was someone in my program who had a really hard and really, it's hard when you go off to a program like an MFA program, and Goddard College, may it rest in peace because it closed last year, had a really wonderful, supportive, gentle MFA program. It was not the kind of program where you walk in with your latest writing and you sit there in a room while people got their knives out and went at it, and it was a pool of blood at the end of the
Mhm.
session. It was not like that. I would not have lasted in a program like that. I didn't want a program like that. But, I mean, the goal in brief workshop sessions that we had was just to look at it and say, what can we make better about this? And that was the whole idea. It was not about you, it was about helping you make your work better. There was one person who could not hear it that way. And watching this person in those sessions was actually how I realized that I had gotten to a point where I didn't hear it the way that they were hearing it anymore. Because, at first it was really hard. It was like, "Oh god, I did this wrong. I'm a terrible writer," all of this.
Mhm.
And but this person, I mean, you actually could see him having that same reaction that I just described with the bad review. You could see his ears turning red. He
Mhm.
looked like those old commercials for the spicy pasta sauce where the steam out of the guy's ears is what was happening. And you were expecting the steam actually, because everything from here up was bright red.
Mhm.
And it did not matter how gingerly we tried to word what we said. And and I understand that to this day this person still says that it was a terrible experience and everyone was very cutthroat and all of this, and the rest of us,
Mhm.
that's not how it was. And after one of our sessions, our advisor, because these always happened in advising meetings that were like an hour long, so you weren't even on the hot seat for more than 5 or 6 minutes, stood in the hallway and tried to explain that this was not a personal thing and that this was about the work, not about the writer.
Mhm.
Was there for a good half hour or 45 minutes, and clearly it didn't make a dent. But I think if you are doing any kind of creative work, whether it's writing, painting, designing, documents for people, however you're defining creativity, and Wendy, I know I define it really, really
Mhm.
broadly, so almost anything. You got to separate yourself from the work, so that you're not taking it personally all the time, because people's comments are about your work, they're not about you. And if you can take those comments as, this is how I'm going to make my work better, and just look at it as, this is about the work, this is about this sentence, and not,
Yeah, and that it can actually genuinely be helpful to get that feedback. I had a very similar experience in seminary, the grad school you go to be a pastor, basically, to get my master's, where we had to preach sermons live in front of the class and the professor, and get that kind of feedback from everyone. Um, and for some people, yeah, like you said, it was just brutal. Um, and I thankfully, I mean, I genuinely valued that. I saw it as, this is constructive feedback. I'd rather get this now than, be in a church where the people that are whose offerings are paying my salary are the ones that are dissatisfied, right? Um, so it was very helpful to me to get that kind of guidance. And it also helped me see, like, one person would like utterly rave and think something was fantastic, and the other one would be like criticizing the same things the one person loved. And so that also helped me see, this everybody's opinion is subjective. I mean, there are some authors that I think are utterly horrible, and some of them are, best-selling famous authors that other people think are utterly wonderful. And that's okay. There's not like this objective standard of this is quality, outstanding work, and this sucks. I mean, to a degree, like grammatical stuff and so forth, but not like overall value of it.
Yeah, and that kind of gets back to what you were saying before, like if somebody unsubscribes from the Spark after I write something, even if I'm kind of surprised because I'm like, I didn't say anything offensive or
Mhm.
what always pops into my head is, okay, well then this wasn't for you, and that's okay. Then you shouldn't be here because this is not the right publication for you. And that's fine. Even though, we're trained to be kind of depressed and take it personally when we
Right.
down, but really it's just a course correction and that's how it should be.
Yeah, I had a similar fear. Like when I first started out, I only did mental health, and I was very careful not to touch on anything like religious or spiritual or like the wider societal controversial issues, because I was so worried about offending people and drive. And yeah, I reached the point where it was like, well, if I offend them over being my authentic self and saying what I really believe, then it's actually good that they're leaving, because they're never going to be, my audience, my ideal clients, whatever you want to call it.
Well, and you don't want to have to be worried that you're going to offend
R-
all the time
right.
because that's no way to live.
Yeah.
I mean, that's crazy. So it's better for those people to self-select out than for you to be sitting there all the time saying, "Can I write about this week or is this going to upset people and then they're going to leave?" Nah, let them leave.
Yeah.
If they're not supposed to be there, let them leave.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
also, because I was so visible, online before I started my Substack, I had like basically these political and religious rant articles published in an independent Texas publication that were very much, like linked to the official GOP party platform, and talking about, they see this is real and this is bad and here's why and these are the real life consequences kind of articles. Same thing with, quoting Bible verses and, saying, this is what's out there publicly, that this is the actual context of that verse, and this is like the Bible's overall message that's clearly contradictory to what they're saying, and that kind of thing. And again, at first I was like, oh, I'm just adding to the division. Um, but now I'm like, there's a middle ground. Like, I don't want to be hateful in return, and I want to be factually accurate and all of that. But at the same time, I don't want to just stay silent and pretend this is normal or okay with me.
Yeah. Yeah. And that again is where you kind of end up saying, or at least I kind of end up saying, this is what I think. And if you have a problem with it, eh, I don't care because this is
Yeah.
what who I am and I can't remake myself to be somebody else for you and somebody else for you and somebody else for you.
Right.
You can't function like that. So this is me.
Yep.
That's it.
Take it or leave it. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
that's kind of the point I've gotten to as well.
Yeah. And I think that's the healthy way to be. And I think when you are younger, I mean, I can't honestly sit here and say, "Oh, I remember how I was when I was 24 when I called my mom on her birthday." I don't really, but I am so sure at least I don't specifically, but I think I really was much more in tune with, I want to say, with what other people thought about me, but I can't possibly have been in tune with that. I
Mhm.
think more in tune with what I thought other
Right.
people thought about me. And so, like that constant worry in the back of your head, like, ooh, other people will think this and they'll think this, and I should be like this and I should do that. And and now I'm just like, I'm just gonna do my thing. And what you think about it is what you think about it. And whatever, doing it anyhow. And that is so incredibly freeing. And I think that's what I saw. Don't ask me how, because I don't think I was really that, wildly prescient at 24. When I looked at 50 at that age, I was like, wow, that must be great, because surely by then you figured it all out. Like, no, no, I was right about the you don't care anymore part, because you really haven't figured it all out. But
Because no one ever does. We're all going to be human. And yeah, like Nancy and I had a previous conversation about, the danger of the coaches and especially the spiritual guru types who are like, I have the secret of life. I have wisdom. I can make you fully enlightened if you just believe and do the things that I teach you. And even if that were possible for like one great teaching to be like it for everybody and one practice to be the right way that heals the world, um it's still not healthy for someone else because it reinforces the idea that, oh, I'm dependent on that other person's wisdom. I can't trust what I believe is right for me or what I want to do. I have to do it this way because they're successful and they're, the person teaching me, so they know their stuff.
yeah, and I think it's just so incredibly dangerous to lose track of your own wisdom and your own truth. And we don't hear often enough in our culture that you even have your own wisdom, and
Yes.
and that it's okay to listen to it, which is kind of ironic, because as I'm saying this, I'm thinking, how many people talk about, you should keep a journal and you should write down your thoughts and whatever, but they don't connect it with that.
Mm.
And yet, what are you doing when you're writing a journal? You're finding out what you think. You're bringing up your own truth. I mean, whenever I sit down and journal, what comes up is my own truth, often in ways that surprise me, and I'm sitting there thinking, "Whoa, where did that come from?"
Definitely.
Don't it's kind of like, and I don't know, maybe I haven't encountered enough people who talk about journaling. So maybe there are folks out there who actually do this, but we don't generally say, sit down and journal and you will unearth your own truth and then you should listen to it. It's more like sit down and journal and just get it all out, and then it gets left there. But that's like only half of the equation, because no, you're finding out what's really actually going on and is true for you, and bringing up wisdom. And usually I also bring up other questions that are great journaling prompts for next time, that'll take it all even deeper and I learn even more. But I mean, there is a whole pile of truth right in here that isn't going to steer you wrong. It's when you let other people tell you that what's in here is wrong that you generally end up in the wrong place.
And that's what our society does, and that's what many religions do. But I mean, just the broader culture is all about this is the path to success. Your value comes from your productivity and climbing the corporate ladder or whatever career you're in, your income of however you get it, all of that kind of stuff. So it's so hard to unlearn that belief when all around you it's reinforced every day, like what's wrong with you, that you're this outlier that's self-employed and that doesn't want to have this long career and keep working more hours, being salaried, making more money, on and on and on. And you want to like be true to yourself. No, you're not allowed to do that in our society. We learn like from little school kid on, these are the rules, you don't follow them, you get punished.
Right, right. And but what I can tell you from some experience is that When I started my podcast, which I actually started recording in 2018 and I launched in 2019, I didn't do it as like a rebellious thing. I did it because I had the idea and I had an opportunity to interview somebody who was crazy enough to say yes, even though I didn't have a name for it. I didn't have anything. I was like, this is such a new thing that I don't have any of this stuff, but could I do an interview with you? and and then it kind of developed a life of its own because now someone had said yes and I had an interview. But anyway, it was kind of, my own curiosity, which is why the title is great. But over time, it took on a life of its own and it became this life-giving thing for me because I was doing this on my own outside of a toxic day job.
Mm.
And at that toxic day job, it was all of the things that we were just talking about. I was being told that, who I was in ways that were not helpful or productive because it was a toxic day job. I mean, everything about it, the environment, the job itself, the things I was being told were all just, it was not going to build me up. It was
Mhm.
going the opposite. And for a long time it already had. And what I realized over time was that, I never talked about the podcast at work. There were a handful of people who knew about it, but they were sworn to secrecy because it was like, no, this is none of your business. If I had an interview with somebody that I had to schedule during the day, during the week, I would just take a day off to do it. It was like no big deal. And it became this lifeline because it proved to me that I was not the things that they kept telling me that I was at
Mm.
that job. And I had no idea when I started it how much I needed that, what it would mean to me, but it literally kind of, there were moments where, I would go in for an annual review or whatever. And even when it was a good review, it was always laced with, but this and but
Mhm.
that, all of this other stuff. And I'd just be sitting there thinking, uh-huh, I have this podcast that I do that, has been doing for all of this time, and I've never not released an episode. I've never had trouble finding guests. It just comes together. I don't always even know how. It's sort of magical. I don't get it. I'm not knocking it. And you're telling me that I'm all of these things, but I've got this happening. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't really care what you think because I know that's not true.
Yeah, writing online was incredibly, and still is, therapeutic for me, because when I first started, it was like you said, it was for myself. Like I desperately needed. It was basically like writing a public journal. I was sharing so much deep personal stuff about my mental health struggles and my financial struggles since, I abruptly lost the career that I planned to keep, all of that stuff. And, before I hit publish the first time, I was like, do I really want to be this vulnerable to the whole world? Because, what if now, no one will ever hire me or want to work with me as a coach or, publish my stuff or whatever. And then another part of me said, well, then would you really want to work for someone like that anyway? And I realized, no, I wouldn't. And also, I was so motivated because I knew, firsthand how painful it was to feel all the shame that comes with depression and the isolation and just, I mean, literally feeling like, I have nothing to offer the world. The world would be better off and I would be better off if I weren't in the world. And so, sharing that with the whole world. And I started my Substack with, I was the only subscriber. I did not have social media followers. I did not have anyone, an audience. Okay. And so just organically, people started stumbling across my articles and leaving comments like, thank you so much. It's really helped me to know that I'm not alone. Or you gave me the courage to seek help or tell this other person, whatever, And that, of course, was just so wonderful. I mean, it's like I did it to heal myself. And here I'm also able to help other people heal. How fabulous is that?
Yeah, I think it is really important to have something that is just for you, especially when you're in that kind of situation where you need something to hang on to because you're being bombarded with all of this other stuff.
Mhm.
it's important to have an outlet anyway, even if you're not in that kind of a situation. But you know, when you have that kind of an outlet that proves that you're competent, that you're capable, and that you can do something that says, actually, I'm not all these things that somebody else is telling me that I am. It is a real lifeline that, you know, like I said, I could not have predicted that it was going to function that way. But, I'm really proud of this goofy podcast, and I shouldn't
Hmm.
call it, I mean, to me, it feels kind of goofy because I do it in my closet in my bedroom, for crying out loud, because I wasn't going to wait to have a studio. So I put together a studio in my closet every week because it's what I have, and frankly, you can't beat the commute. But like, I have this thing, and I made it work. And it's Listen Notes tells me it's a top 5% podcast, which boggles my mind. And and here it is. I won an honorable mention in the Dystopia Creative Podcast Awards last year, which also boggles my mind. I literally threw this thing together out of an idea that I had in the shower at the gym one day in like late 2017. So, it proves that if you follow your own weird idea, it might turn out not to be so weird after all. But it also just it builds your confidence. It does great things for you, and sometimes you need that stuff. And again, it comes back to, I don't care what you think. It gives you a better way to say, I don't care that this is what you think about me, because I know I can do this. I have
Yeah.
thing happening all the time that you don't know about, because you'll find a way to say that it's a conflict of interest or something and that I can't do it. And I'm not letting you take it from me, because you can't take it from me.
Yeah. And even for me, it was challenging my own in the beliefs I had internalized because of all those outer critics and come to believe about myself. And then, through the process of connecting with others and just doing what I felt intuitively led to do, like my first paid offering was this Zoom spiritual support for weary souls group, and I limited it to 12 people. And I kind of felt guilty charging at all for it, but it was like, okay, I have to pay the rent, and I can't just give my landlord thank you notes from all the grateful people I've helped. So anyway, so I wasn't sure what would happen, but basically I created the group that I knew that I needed, and I could sense that a lot of other people needed too. And it was wonderful, and participants loved it so much they wanted to keep meeting after it ended, and we are. And then so I'm going to do the same group again starting May 4th with a new group of 12 people. And that info's on my Substack. But yeah, so the point is, yeah, I just trusted myself, and like, okay, I need this, and everyone I've talked to, like friends, really needs this now. We're all so desperate for a space where it's safe, especially about spiritual stuff now, because that's become such a loaded topic. And people get shamed for asking questions in some communities, or they get shamed for being too out there, whether it's tarot cards, which aren't out there at all anymore, but for in some communities they're still not okay. So yeah, it's powerful. And actually, I see your note that you have a question. I don't think Substack enables audience members to speak at all, but if you want to try to type your question, we'll see if we can somehow fit it in.
And I will say that Wendy is a great facilitator. So if you're thinking about joining that group, go for it. It's a good experience.
Thank you. And ditto for Nancy's podcast. I'm not just saying that because I was a guest on it. Of course, I think our episode is awesome. But before, in preparation to be a guest on it, I listened to multiple other episodes. And when I first went to the page, I was like, okay, I'll listen to, one episode or a few minutes of a couple different ones. But like I kept going down the rabbit hole, and like every guest and topic sounded so interesting to me. So they're all wonderful. And she doesn't have like pre-scripted questions. They're just like conversations that are fascinating.
That's what we do.
Okay, so I'm trying to look at Ashley's question here. I constantly believe that I'm getting onto a nonstop roller coaster. It's your passion. I can relate to that because it's my passion, but yet I'm also now trying to earn money doing it, and those two are often in conflict. Um,
One writing block after another. Yeah, that's
yeah,
not
I don't have a content planner. I literally, like, every Friday wake up and I'm like, okay, what am I going to write today? Or now, what am I going to record today? Um, and I keep hearing about how important it is to have a content strategy and a planner, and I actually think that's very wise advice. I just don't seem capable of doing it. Maybe it's my ADHD, whatever. But yeah, I mean, for me, I think everyone has writing blocks, and maybe they're just fear of how, I don't know what I want to say or how to say it well enough yet, and it may just be something to journal about and that you're not ready to put out into the world yet, and that's okay. And you can just kind of ask yourself, you know what am I afraid to write about? I've heard some people suggest literally just write over and over on a blank page, I don't know what to write, and that if you do it long enough, something will flow out.
that's one thing. I see PTSD and OCD. Ashley, what kind of stuff do you write? Are you talking more like a Substack thing or oh, Medium? Okay.
Yeah, I started on Medium. I have like 150 articles on Medium on everything under the sun, and I got crickets for a long, long time. Still do, actually. That's just why I switched to Substack.
Yeah, I would also recommend one of my favorite creativity tools because I'm a creativity coach. One of my favorite things is just really small steps. Break it down into absolutely tiny steps, so small that you know you can't not do them. So like, it'll feel ridiculous. Like, yeah, a 3-year-old could do that. That's about the size of a small step because then you know that you're not going to be able to get in your own way. And so when you when you manage that first small step, it's enough to give you the confidence that, yeah, okay, so now I can get to the next one, which you still want to make a really small step. And it sounds stupid to a lot of people, and it can sound kind of infantile and whatever, but those little steps add up in a hurry a whole lot faster than trying to take one big step. So don't discount the power of tiny little steps, and that can even include, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do this for 5 minutes, and if that
Hmm.
feels much, make it three, make it two. But you don't have to actually blast through blocks. Like if you think of your creative blocks as a boulder in the middle of the road, you don't have to destroy the boulder, you just have to get around the boulder. So don't make it harder than it has to be. There's no benefit in destroying that boulder because getting around it is just as good. You're still on your way on the other side.
Yeah, and maybe the block is trying to teach you something, and it's what you need. I mean, we all have seasonal rhythms and times where we need to rest and reflect and not push ourselves to do so much. Um, and I mean, yeah, I still get overwhelmed all the time, and then I catch myself and I'm like, oh, I've been sitting here for 8 hours straight trying to do this thing and overthinking it and over editing it. I need to stop and go walk in the park or read a novel or take a nap. And so it's easy to get overwhelmed. The other thing I will say, since you did mention having PTSD and OCD, is that it has really helped me to do NAMI's free online support groups. They have some in person ones too, but I do the Zoom ones. There's one specifically for PTSD. I mean, they have them for everything under the sun. So if you just go to NAMI.org, NAMI.org, they also have tons of educational resources and other things. But for me, just being in that safe space to talk with other people with similar mental health issues was very helpful too.
Yeah, overwhelm is small steps are key for dealing with overwhelm. And again, I'm a coach, not a therapist, so I'm going to go with Wendy's suggestion for the other stuff because I can't speak to that.
But the
But
small steps thing, I can't tell you how many therapists have told me that, or have told other people I know in therapy that. Literally, my therapist at one point said, like, if you want to go to the gym, step one is you put on your gym clothes, and that's all you do that day. You don't even try to get out of the house. Day two, you like lace up your tennis shoes or whatever. I mean, literally that small.
that's small.
Yeah.
Yep. That is not too small. That's exactly small enough. And that's why I said it sounds crazy and even infantile to a lot of people, But if you are really having trouble and feeling overwhelmed, that's plenty. It gets you started, but it doesn't overwhelm you. It's enough to just get that far, and then you know you can get that far, and then the next step will get you a little bit farther at a pace that you can handle.
Yeah. And Jamie says she has PTSD but has not found the groups helpful. It's so subjective, as with any group of humans. Same thing with 12-step groups. I'm not in recovery, but I went to some like open meeting 12-step groups that were very helpful. I also went to one that was so bad I got up and walked out in the middle. Like everything that 12-step group principles that you're supposed to follow, especially no crosstalk, which is not giving other people unsolicited advice, that's all this group was doing. And so I literally got up and walked out. So it totally depends on the people in that group. And if it's like a therapy group with a facilitator, obviously it depends on the facilitator too. I did one outpatient group where I was like, oh my God, this person is so awful. I could facilitate this group so much better than they are, and they're doing more harm than good. And so, yeah, any group of humans. And yes, I'm so sorry to hear that, Ashley. That would certainly be a trauma that it would be very difficult to recover from. And when I was a pastor, I had parents that were still grieving, deaths of children by suicide or killed by a drunk driver, and murder is a whole nother level too. So, yeah, I mean, obviously that's not gonna just magically heal. That takes a lot of support in multiple ways. And for me, and who had nothing nearly, like that, but just life traumas. I've had many years of therapy and journaling and groups and all kinds of things. So
And Jamie can definitely attest to the power of writing her story.
yeah, same here. I have an article literally titled "Writing Online is the Best Thing I've Ever Done for My Mental Health," and another one, how how our wounds can become sources of healing instead of shame, which is all about once I put it online for the whole world to see all my mental health struggles and other life struggles, but especially the mental health stuff, and was that vulnerable and admitted that I had been suicidal and all the rest. Suddenly it wasn't this shameful secret anymore. It's like, yeah, anyone that happens to stumble across this on the internet is going to know all this deeply personal shit about me, and I'm okay with that now. If they don't like that, if they think less of me because of that, then that's on them, and they're not the kind of person I'd really want to have a close relationship with anyway, or work with. So,
Amen to that.
so we have a few more minutes, Nancy, and I know one issue that's near and dear to both of our hearts, both because we've struggled with it and because we kind of help other people deal with it in various ways, is perfectionism.
Yeah.
And so I know your Make Bad Art course is all about that. And for me, the spiritual support is partly that, because people have this mindset of like I should be able to forgive my abuser but I can't, or whatever others should, it might be, it's not okay to be LGBTQ, you name it, and there's all this underlying shame and sense that I have to please these other people, therefore I have to hide who I really am, and who I really am is not okay, is bad. And so yeah, it's just all about coming to accept yourself, like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, there's so much that gets tangled up in perfectionism, and a lot of it is that I'm not good enough, and that seeps out into all of that self-judgment, and it colors everything else in your life. I mean, the most amazing thing to me when I've taught Make Bad Art so far is how tackling the perfectionism and self-judgment, you know, seeps is not really the right word because somehow that seems kind of icky to me, but but it does. It trickles into everything else. And it really improves people's relationships with everyone else, which makes sense because you improve your relationship with yourself and therefore you improve your relationship with everybody else. You kind of can't really do one without the other. When you relax and aren't being so harsh with yourself, you open up, you're able to hear other people more easily, which means that, when you're not able to hear them more easily, you're probably being more harsh with them and not paying as much attention, and they feel more frustrated. All of these things go together. So, it's been one of those things. When I designed the course, I knew that that was likely to happen, but actually watching it happen has been amazing, because it is that to a degree beyond what I originally envisioned. And it's so gratifying and phenomenal to watch the change that it makes for folks, because
Absolutely.
perfectionism in a particular context, most of us, and don't realize how much it pervades everything else. So yeah, and it's tricky, because we get all of these perfectionistic messages, which again, I feel like we keep circling back to, like, the I don't care what you think, but that's where a lot of it comes from, is caring what other people think. So we get all of this stuff from TV shows and advertising, and what your family thinks, or what you think your family thinks,
Mhm.
all of that, which is why I think we're all recovering perfectionists, because we're still constantly bombarded with it. So we still have to be on guard against it. Not necessarily in the sense of I'm on guard, all in that kind of way, but you still kind of have to have that mindset of, wait, what did I just say to myself? That I don't need to be that way with myself. I don't need to be saying should. I don't need to be looking for the right way to do things all the time, because a lot of the time there isn't really a right way to do things. Um, and just being more gentle with yourself, which feels really good. So once you get the hang of it, it's kind of nice, but I
Yeah.
do it in a group, because being in the community helps a lot. It's harder to do this when you're doing it on your own. So yeah, but once you start looking for all the perfectionism around you, it becomes very difficult not to see it everywhere, which is also part of what's enlightening about the process. But
Yeah, and also you add to that the layer that women especially are so culturally conditioned to ignore our own needs and be the sacrificial one, even if we're not moms, just like to the world, basically be the caring, empathetic one that's always there for other people and puts their needs ahead of our own. Um, and that's another thing that I work with, especially with the spiritual stuff, because there's that whole underlying thing of serve your neighbor and the be the least of all of that kind of stuff. And I always say to people, Jesus said love your neighbor as yourself. He didn't say instead of. He didn't say more than, at the expense of, et cetera, et cetera. But that has gotten so twisted into this, like, that it's noble somehow to burn out, suffer, give up. Like one of my friends says, set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. And, I mean, that obviously doesn't do either of you any good ultimately.
yeah, but I think the thing is, love your neighbor as yourself. How many of us love ourselves as much as we should?
Yeah, exactly. It's easier to love the neighbor for many of us than to love ourselves. Certainly, for me, it has been. But also, like you said, Nancy, once we are able to start loving ourselves, we're also more loving to other people. Because when we're critical of ourselves, we're equally critical of everyone else around us. We have those same impossibly high perfectionist standards.
Yeah.
So,
And it can ruin your relationships if you don't do something about it. And a lot of people don't realize that's what's ruining them.
mhm,
So yeah, if you get in there and you start really rooting it out, it can really make a huge difference.
yeah. And there are so many people on Substack that are sharing similar messages now, and not all of them older than 50. Some great younger ones have wisdom that I wish I had had at that age. Um, but yeah, I mean that I think if there's one overarching theme, at least in like my bubble of Substack, it's all about authenticity, and whatever that means for you and however you express it, just being okay with being your full self and creating the life you want to have, even if everyone else thinks you're crazy, thinks it's not okay, judges you, condemns you. What matters is what you think of yourself more than anything else.
Yeah, I think the younger generations are getting that at a much younger age than we did, and I'm very happy about that for them, and I hope that it continues that way.
Same here. Well,
Yeah.
it is 2 o'clock now. We want to keep these to an hour and respect everyone's time. Thank you so much to all who have joined us live. And both Nancy and I will be sharing a recording of this later in various places. So if you couldn't be here live, when you watch this later, I hope you benefit from it just as much. And Nancy, thank you for being my first guest in the series and having such a great conversation.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Bye, everyone.